what we heard is a lot of the same excuses that Democrats have made for years about being soft on crime. Claims about mass incarceration or systemic racism or what have you. I would point out that almost no one is in federal prison for mere drug possession. It is a myth that there are low-level, non-violent offenders in prison because they're addicted to drugs. What we are at is a 21-year low in the number of federal inmates that we have. You know what we're not at? A 21-year low in drug deaths, the highest on record. Every single year, year after year, almost twice as many died in the Vietnam War, almost 24 times as many died in the entire Iraq War, almost 35 times as many died on 9/11. Yet Democrats repeatedly refuse to crack down on deceptive fentanyl dealers. As I mentioned, I've also offered bills in the past that would permanently add fentanyl to the Controlled Substance Act scheduling. The Democrats refuse to do so. They'll do it temporarily for time to time, but they want to trade. They want to get a trade for something. They want to either reduce sentences or let prisoners out, whether they're Democratic senators or Democratic governors in places like Illinois, eliminating the bail system, Democratic mayors and Democratic prosecuting attorneys in places like Chicago. And as a result, we have a crime wave and a drug epidemic all across America. And let me just reiterate, the bill I just offered that the senator from Illinois blocked, it would simply say you cannot sell another drug and not acknowledge that fentanyl is in it. You cannot misrepresent what you're selling. It's not just opioids. It's not just heroin. It's even marijuana. It's pills that are passed off as mere prescription drugs, like in some of the examples I gave, Adderall, OxyContin, Percocet, that people all across America are dying from. Well, let's take another angle on this problem. Almost all of these drugs come from Mexico. Almost all the drugs in America today come from Mexico. They almost all come from a handful of vicious, depraved cartels in Mexico. Cartels that have taken on the powers of a quasi-state. Cartels that the Mexican government either cannot or will not crack down on. So let's look at it from that perspective. It's past time that we bring the full weight of the United States government to bear on these cartels and to destroy them for what they're unleashing on our streets. Imagine if ISIS or Al-Qaeda set up shop across our border and was responsible for more than 100,000 American deaths every single year. What would we do? What would you do? I know what we wouldn't do. We wouldn't hesitate to act. And that's exactly what we should do with these Mexican cartels. Unfortunately, President Biden has done the opposite. Since the day he took office, he has flung open our borders, created a border crisis, and made it easier than ever to smuggle massive amounts of illegal drugs into the United States. Already this year, the Border Patrol has found over 12,000 pounds of fentanyl being smuggled over our border. 12,000 pounds. You may not be able to put that in perspective. Let me put it in perspective for you. It is enough to kill every man, woman, and child in America many, many times over. That doesn't even include any fentanyl brought in by the hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens who the DHS calls gotaways. President Biden could declare the fentanyl peddling cartels to be foreign terrorist organizations, but he has refused to do so. So the bill that I'm about to bring up would give him additional tools, short of labeling these cartels terrorists. My bill would create a new designation called a significant transnational criminal organization, and it would enable the federal government to impose many of the same sanctions and use many of the same tools against cartels that it already does against terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Those would include barring cartel members and their immediate families from entering the United States, freezing assets belonging to the cartels to hit their wallets, and to keep them from profiting off of death and destruction, and enabling civil and criminal penalties for anyone who provides material assistance or resources to cartels. Now, the Democrats have just blocked my bill that would keep new fentanyl variants illegal. They've just blocked another bill that would target drug, or I should say they're going to block a bill later today that would keep new fentanyl variants illegal. They just blocked another bill that would target drug traffickers who trick people into taking fentanyl that kills them. I hope at least Democratic senators would be willing to say that we should give the Biden administration more tools to use against the Mexican cartels, some of the worst and most depraved criminals on earth. Therefore, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of my bill, Senate Bill 621, the Significant Transnational Criminal Organization Designation Act, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Objection.
Serving the right to object.
The Democratic whip.
The senator from Arkansas's views on immigration are well known. He's been consistent in opposing immigration. But it's interesting to me that people like him who oppose immigration always at the end seem to go after the same people, mothers and children. We saw it with the cages that kids were kept in. We saw it when kids were forcibly removed from their parents at the border during the Trump years. We've seen it time and again, and now we see it with the governor of Florida and the governor of Texas putting mothers and children on buses and busing them off hundreds of miles away from where they were picked up, whether there's any contact there or not. Mothers and children are always a focal point of anti-immigration rhetoric, and once again, this bill does that. I agree completely when it comes to stopping transnational criminal organizations, but to focus the bill on innocent spouses and children, including minor children, and make them the target of the bill seems to me going beyond any reasonable law enforcement. There is a narrow exception in the bill that allows a spouse or child to be admitted to the United States if they can somehow convince the consular officer that they did not know or could not reasonably have known their spouse or parent's membership in a criminal organization. But there's no exception for battered spouses or children who are often victims of these organizations themselves. And the bill gives what appears to be unreviewable discretion to these consular officers to decide whether an innocent spouse or child has renounced the organization. These transnational criminal organizations must be sanctioned and stopped, but this is not the way to do it, going after mothers and children. And I want to make a point, since the senator concluded after my last statement that I am somehow soft on crime. Could I go through a short list here of bills that I voted for to get tough on crime? Let's take a look at this bill, the American Rescue Plan. That American Rescue Plan passed in the United States Senate and provided billions of dollars to state and local communities for police and crime protection. More money for police and crime protection from this Senate to those communities. I voted for it. The senator from Arkansas voted against it. Then the Congress passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. In that bill was $430 million investment in our ports of entry, helping DHS to screen vehicles for fentanyl. You see these drugs come through ports of entry. This idea of a backpack full of drugs being hiked over the border by someone in the middle of the night, that's not where the bulk of these drugs come from. They come through the port of entry. So we put $430 million investment to make those ports of entry even stronger and tougher, and I agree with that completely, helping Department of Homeland Security to screen vehicles to stop fentanyl from coming in. I voted for that. The senator from Arkansas voted no. Who's soft on crime? Then we passed the March Omnibus Appropriations Bill, tens of millions of dollars in increased funding for hiring police officers and technology upgrades at the border to detect and seize fentanyl and other illicit cargo. I voted for that. The senator from Arkansas voted against it. Who's soft on crime? And when we passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the most serious bipartisan step Congress has taken to end gun violence in 30 years, I voted for it. The senator from Arkansas voted against it. Who's soft on crime? The American people can see which party is passing legislation actually funds law enforcement, addresses crime and violence in a thoughtful way. And they can see when the bills come up on the floor, one party gives the speeches, the other party gives the votes. I'm going to continue to vote to support the police and put an end to this drug crisis in America in a thoughtful and sensible way. I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President,
The junior senator from Arkansas.
I think we know who's soft on crime. It sounds like I hit a nerve. I didn't stand up here saying I'm not soft on crime 5 or 6 times in a row. It's the senator from Illinois who said that, just like Senate Democrats have been saying it for the last several months, just like their candidates all across America are saying it. But let's look at the first bill he mentioned, the American Rescue Plan. You know what that is, right? The American Rescue Plan? That's their $2 trillion wasteful spending bill from last spring. That's responsible for 13% inflation. You know what also included in it? A measure that would give stimulus checks to prisoners. That's right, depraved, violent felons, murderers and rapists and drug traffickers all across America. People like the Boston Marathon bomber got stimulus checks last year because the Democrats believe that criminals are really at heart victims as well, victims of an oppressive society and system. If I'm not mistaken, when I offered my amendment to prevent prisoners from getting stimulus checks, I think it was the senator from Illinois who stood up and blocked it. I know that he voted against it. I know that he wanted prisoners to get stimulus checks. That's what he's talking about. Or what about his objection to this bill that it's going to target mothers and kids, the poor mothers and children of drug kingpins, a very common feature of American sanctions efforts. In fact, sanctions efforts that we're doing exactly against Russian oligarchs and regime figures, which I support, by the way. I support. No, the wives and the children of Russian oligarchs and Mexican cartel kingpins should not benefit from their ill-gotten gains. But I care more about the lives of American citizens, the 100,000 plus American citizens that we lose every single year than anyone else in the world. So the Biden administration's policy, though, is that we'll use this tool against Russians, but we're not going to use it against Mexican cartel members. I think that goes to show you where their priorities are. So again, just to recap, we tried to pass legislation that would have imposed heightened penalties on drug traffickers who misrepresent their drugs and say they don't contain fentanyl. The senator from Illinois blocked it on behalf of the Democrats. Just now, we tried to give the Biden administration more tools to target the cartels that are smuggling these drugs into our country, that are killing 100,000 of our fellow citizens. Again, on behalf of Senate Democrats, the senator from Illinois blocked it. I say again, over 108,000 Americans were killed by drugs last year. Yet the Democrats continue to refuse to crack down on drug traffickers and cartel kingpins. Some of my other colleagues are going to offer similar bills today, just like I'm going to offer yet again my permanent fentanyl scheduling bill that would stop the annual kabuki dance here of the Democrats demanding some pro-criminal law just so we can permanently add fentanyl to the Controlled Substance Act schedule. Think about that. At a time when 108,000 Americans are dying every single year. That's not an aggregate number, every single year. The Democrats refuse to act if they don't get something in return on behalf of criminals. If they can't reduce drug sentences for hardened criminals, if they can't let more felons out of prison. It shows a depraved indifference to the lives of our people. Madam President, I yield the floor.
The Democratic whip.
Passing legislation is difficult at any stage in American history. It's increasingly difficult when it's a 50-50 Senate. You have to work it. You have to be willing to sit down with someone from the other side of the aisle and find a co-sponsor so that you have a bipartisan bill. I've seen that work. In fact, I was part of it. It was Senator Chuck Grassley and I that put together the First Step Act, which was part of prison reform, significant prison reform in this country. Who signed the First Step Act? President Donald Trump. Soft on crime? What we did was work out something that was bipartisan, sensible, and really makes a difference in making certain that people currently serving in prison will one day be released, and most will, and not return to crime when that happens. I think that was time well spent, but it took a bipartisan effort. I could have come to the floor every day of the week and offered my best idea on how to fight crime, But if you can't pass it on a bipartisan basis in the Senate, it doesn't work. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of patience and compromise to make a real change in the law. Even if you think you have the best idea on earth, you've got to work at it. I yield the floor.